All right, so this is the Take Your Health Back Now podcast, our last of 2024. We are going to be talking about navigating the food system, all of those scientists and companies instead of farmers we've got in charge of things now. It makes things confusing. And there's a lot of like political environment that's actually bringing light to new areas of foods, and people are so confused. Like, people have always been confused and now they're super confused. So we are just going to dive into that. So welcome, I'm Jenny Wise. This is Kendra Duquette. We are from Take Your Health Back Now. We are experts in all things preventative health, environmental toxins, lifestyle. Check out our website and our past podcasts. If you're new, welcome.
Hello. Yes, a lot of confusion lately. There's a lot of noise in this space right now. And like Jenny said, there's a little more emphasis on our food system right now with the political side of things, and we're hearing a lot about synthetic dyes and, colors and things and foods that maybe, European Union doesn't have, but we allow here. And so for some people, you knew this, still confusing. Some people, this is new to you, very confusing. And just remember that even though there's hopefully going to be this big shift, hopefully these will be taken out of foods, that type of thing. It still comes down to your choice, you being educated and you moving on this now, because it can take a long time, bureaucracy. It's a long time for things to move. So just do it now, and just, and that's all about empowerment, right? Making choice, taking control of your own health, your own choices. So anyway, we're going to dive in. I've got this bullet pointed out. We're going to run through these because this podcast could take 10 hours.
Right. We could talk on this for so long. Like, each little topic could be its own podcast.
Its own topic. Yeah. So I'm just going to, nail down all of the big ones that I thought of. I'm sure we'll think of more along the way. If anybody's on here and you have questions, feel free to ask. So I'm just going to kind of go down the list of what I have. So I start out with synthetic chemicals and additives because, that's the big buzz right now. In processed foods. So if you think about, we've been hearing a lot about red number, the red dye, that one. Okay, there are 10,000 plus synthetic chemicals in foods. So even if they do take a few of these out, think how many are there. It will take a very long time. And the other thing to think about, anytime that something is taken out, something else is put back in to take its place because it had a purpose. And these are companies that are big money makers. I mean, when you're talking big ag, you're talking big food. These are billion-dollar companies. So yeah, if we have to take out a chemical, they're going to put something back in.
Right. And in the US, unfortunately, that's how our system is set up. So I know in a lot of other countries, like in EU, they label things a little different and their laws are slightly different. So everything synthetic has these E numbers, and their laws are more about what is allowed in or isn't allowed in at a foundational level. Ours tend to be more like reactive to, this one red food dye 40 has now had tests and shown to create these health reactions. So we're going to take that one thing out. So that's what allows them to put something else back in that's almost the same, because that thing now hasn't been tested. We don't have laws at like that foundational level that says chemicals can't go in. So this is, hopefully that will change too. But in the meantime, you have to not get too swept up in these smaller changes. If it's like one thing that gets removed, you can't be like, oh, it's all great now.
Right. And it goes a lot deeper than just the chemical that was in the food. So, okay. So with this, the synthetic chemicals and additives, these are added for color. That's a big one. And it's not just in processed foods, they also inject it into your produce. So color additive is used across the board in conventional and processed food. Flavor enhancer. So those are chemicals that make it taste better to you. It also makes you crave it. You know, like you can remember if you haven't had Doritos in 20 years, I bet you can remember what it tastes like. You know, I can, and I haven't had them in decades, you know, and that's why it's a neurotoxin. It's a, you know, it's a brain stimulator.
Yes, that's why it's so hard to quit smoking.
Or eating these foods. I mean, it
Right?
really,
It's an addiction that your brain remembers. Just because you stop doesn't mean your brain's like, oh, what's that?
right. And they are purposefully put in there because they know they're addictive. You know,
Yes.
there is a purpose for all of these. So on top of flavor enhancer, there's also chemicals to extend the shelf life. Because, you know, if you think about if you have an orange, it's going to go bad probably within a week or so. It should. Maybe not now with all the additives, but you know, it should start molding. Anything that is real, natural, has
Right.
very short life.
Yeah, and they're all slightly different. This is why we used to have root cellars because root vegetables, if kept
Right.
dry and in the dark, they would last longer. And people realized that. So they created an environment where they wouldn't, you know, rot as fast. And that was it. It was root vegetables. There
Right.
wasn't, they weren't keeping strawberries down there for the middle of winter.
Right. Exactly. So, and then if you think about, you have a box of Pop-Tarts, how long will that last before it molds? Decades. I mean, you know, it will
I
never go.
don't think it will ever mold unless you get it wet or something.
Right. So it's extended, you know, this chemical is now extended the shelf life. Or, you know, you see the people that do the McDonald's experiments with their Happy Meal from 20 years ago, and it still looks exactly the same.
Yes, so I have to, this is slightly off topic, but the McRib is back. Like this is all over. I don't know why I am suddenly getting McDonald's on my anything, you know, I shouldn't, but it must be being pushed so much that it's just everywhere, right? So I'm like morbidly curious, like how what is this McRib? Like I've seen it before. I don't think I've ever eaten one. Um, and I'm like, how can they make something shaped like a rib that looks like it has bones, but you just eat it, like the whole thing?
Right.
So I had to look it up, and it is a process restructured pork patty. And
Mhm.
apparently, the process of restructuring meat was invented by a food scientist for the army a long time ago, like I think in the 1920s, so that they could provide cheap meat to soldiers overseas. And now it's pushed, like this was to make meat as cheap as possible, to restructure it, to at least get these, you know, soldiers to eat it because it was disgusting. It looked pretty. So now it's being pushed as this special thing you can only get once a year. Go out and get it.
Right.
It's so gross. Sorry, had to interject.
No, that's true. And the whole
Yeah.
3D printed meat and all of that,
Right.
I mean, that falls into this category.
Yes, food scientists are not the people you want in charge of what you're eating.
No, no, they don't care about nutrition. They don't care about anything except that you will buy it, make the
Yes,
money, and it costs them the least amount of money.
exactly. Cheapest to produce.
Right. No, that's a good example. And then flavors. So that kind of goes along with flavor enhancer. So flavors are the actual flavor. Flavor enhancer makes it even better and makes you addicted to it. So they're two different things. Also, anytime you see anything that says fortified with vitamins, it means, you know, like cereal, for example, is fortified. It means that that food through the processing is devoid of any nutritional content at all. So then they have to add vitamins back in, which means it's fortified, but what they fortify it with is synthetic vitamins. So
Right.
that's another synthetic chemical. Also the word natural means nothing. Except that it's probably bad and should be avoided. So natural flavors are not natural at all. natural chicken. I always think that's so weird.
Like, why do they have to tell you that? Do we have that much unnatural stuff that we have to know when it's natural?
Exactly. So there's a lot of that to make people go, oh, this is a better choice because it's
Yeah.
natural. And the other thing to think about, and we'll talk about that later, is synthetic biology or bioengineering.
Yeah.
Can be used under that word natural, and they don't have to label it. So we'll talk about that in a second, because that's a big one. And that is a booming, that's one of the biggest industries right now growing, like into next year. It's a huge, huge industry. Excuse me. And then, okay, so then the second topic. Oh, also, I was going to say all of these synthetic chemicals that we're talking about, those are only in non-organic food. They're not allowed to be in organic.
Right. Yes.
So, just switching to organic, you're avoiding those chemicals. These are also in your pet's food, so look for them there as well. And then so my number 2 is organic processed food additives that are synbio. So I just talked about that, and we'll talk about it later. So the third one is labels. Labels are confusing. So you've got GMO. They have dropped that. It was last year or the year before. They dropped it, and now they call it bioengineered. So if you see the word bioengineered, that just means it's GMO or has GMO crop in it.
Right.
But
and usually, I mean, they're not required to put it on there in the US, but if it's something that is going somewhere else, they might have the same packaging. It's generally very small under the ingredients list, or like right above the ingredients list. It's not like this big label on the front. You have to really look for it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people confused about this lately. I don't think they realize that it just means GMO. It's just that they quit putting GMO because people were onto GMO,
Right.
to avoid GMO. So now it's bioengineered.
Right.
But true bioengineered is that synthetic biology that they don't have to label with anything. And then another one that I know confuses people is the little blue butterfly, the GMO Project Verified that's on. So like you get potato chips that says GMO product verified with the blue butterfly, and in your mind you think it's organic, but it's not. All it means is that potato isn't GMO. So it's kind of I know that they were trying to do a good thing with that labeling, that where that came to be, from the women that started that, but it's kind of almost, they use it now more like a marketing thing so that people
and that people don't understand the difference, because it's just simply a label or a little icon graphic, almost like people in their minds kind of conflate non-GMO with organic, and people conflate organic with healthy. And those things aren't the same. Like non-GMO means no bioengineering. It can also be organic and it can also be healthy, but it doesn't mean that it is all the time.
Right. So you could have, like, say you bought something like rice cakes. That sounds gross, but
yummy
rice cakes that said GMO, certified, verified, whatever that is, Project Verified, with the blue butterfly, as opposed to some other brand rice cakes that didn't have that. People would buy, if they're looking for something healthier, they would buy the one with the blue butterfly, thinking, oh, okay, well, good, that's not GMO. But rice is never GMO. GMO is not a GMO crop. So that's where it's kind of deceptive in a way, because if you don't know your GMO crops, then maybe you fall prey to that. So just think about that. And then the numbers on produce is always confusing to people. So when you're like, if you're trying to buy organic as opposed to conventional, organic, the PLU number always starts with a 9, and it's always 5 numbers long. Conventional starts with a 4, and it's 4 numbers long. Also, it can start with a 3. So those are the numbers to look for, just to make sure. Because I know sometimes even here in town at Green Top, they'll have something that says, like the little sign might say organic, but then you pick up your lemon and you look and it's actually conventional number. So
or there's no sign, or things get mixed up.
Right. exactly. So that's just something, if you're looking between conventional or organic, you can always look for those numbers on produce. And then my number 4 is conventional farming of crops. So, which is a huge topic all in itself. So conventional farming of crops, around here where we live, it's mostly soy and corn, which is GMO. Most of that goes for ethanol or processed food or dog food or livestock feed, period. But the thing, and then when we're talking about conventional crops, we're talking about, your strawberries, your blueberries, your peppers, your avocados, all the things. It can be anything that is produce. So the number of pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, all the sides, I mean, there's a lot. There's many that can be used over the process of the farming, because they're sprayed on seeds. A lot of those seeds, not those particular ones I just mentioned, but they can be GMO seeds like the corn and the soy. The seed itself is GMO.
Right.
They might, like, say you have an avocado seed. I don't know, that's probably a bad example, but they spray it on the seeds, then they spray it on the application of the crop several times a year. Pesticides, insecticides. One is for pests, so like pests, maybe locusts come in and are eating the crop, something like that. Grasshoppers, that would be pest. Insecticide, or does it go the other way? I don't know. Insecticide is like a subcategory of pesticides, so they
Right, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Like one is just higher level than the other. One is a little bit more specific.
right, more
Yeah.
broad, like an umbrella, and then one is
Yeah.
But then you also have and remember these two, if they're sprayed on the produce, so say at the end of harvest, they're sprayed on. All of these, they're getting into your produce that you're going to be ingesting. It's not like it's just sprayed on the outside. It's
Right.
You cannot get rid of it.
Yeah, just like us, the things that get put on the foliage or the outside do make it to the inside. And then things like herbicides that are there to keep the weeds out of the overall farming, those go down in the soil and get taken up through the roots. So then you also have herbicides inside, even though it's not trying to, the herbicides aren't focused on the crop you're eating, but they're focused on keeping that crop healthy by getting rid of other like weeds.
Right. And not healthy, but not being taken out by, and yeah, so it goes in. And if you think about too, this is kind of off the topic, but it pertains to what we're talking about. With people, with animals, with plants, anything that is living has detoxification methods, pathways in the body or the system. And plants are really good at, and trees, are good at taking in the toxins and, trying to filter them and eliminate them. So no matter what, like Jenny said, the plant is taking it up, and it now incorporated into everything that has to do with that plant, just like animals, just like ourselves. And then I also had for this one, fertilizers. So people tend to think fertilizers aren't bad because they're fertilizing, but they're not. The conventional farming, they use ammonia and different things that it may
Some really gross stuff, guys.
really gross. And the extra gross is they can use biosludge.
Yeah.
And I don't remember, it was 27 states, I think.
We haven't actually looked at it in a couple years, so that could be different, but I think that's what it was maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, and it could be more now. And if you live in Illinois, where we do, Illinois definitely is a state that allows that. So biosludge is, they're always looking for ways to get rid of waste, because
more economically, like make it, instead of something we have to pay to get rid of, make it something someone will pay to buy, to use.
Make money off of it. So the biosludge is when they take from the sewer plant, so everything that goes down the drain, down the toilet,
waste, all that waste,
all that yummy stuff, goes to the waste treatment plant, the sewer. They take out all the water, because then they filter that and repurpose it. But all of that solid material that's left over, that would have normally, what would you do with it? Goes to the landfill, which is not good either. So yes, somebody came up with a brilliant idea that, cow manure is really good for gardens, which it is. So why not human waste and all of
Right.
the waste? So yeah, so
Our soil is dead. Let's put nutrients back in somehow.
Right. So they package it up and they sell it as fertilizer. So they're taking that waste, solid waste product, package it up, make money off of it, and then they're spraying it on our fields, on conventional crops. And if you really think about it, I mean, it's not just poop for it's, think about all the people on medications,
Yeah.
vaccines, whatever they're ingesting.
Right. And our water treatment plants are not made to filter that stuff out. Like there's been so much information on that like we are adding so much to the system that these plants are not equipped. So our water quality is great because they're only testing for these things that are, decades old. So all that stuff is still there. It's not getting filtered out.
Nanotechnology, the particulars are so small that they go right through. Got, I mean,
people just dump their medications. We've talked about this. They dump chemicals, they dump medications because they don't know how to get rid of them. So that's in there.
Right, cleaning supplies. This is gross, but I mean, but it's true. If you think about the morgue, people that, funeral directors, that whole business is kind of, but they're taking out the fluids and they're putting in the formaldehyde, and there's like a drain that goes right into the sewer system. So there's just so much coming in that now they're spraying on the crops. But again, they can only use that on conventional farming. It is not allowed on organic farming.
Right.
So just keep that in mind. And even if it's crops like the corn and the soy, it's still, that's going right into your processed food that you're eating. So just kind of keep that.
And it's going back into the water table.
And that's the other thing that's on my list. Yeah, it affects the water, which is a big part of why our water is polluted. And not just that, but also the pesticides, insecticides, the fungicides, all those things. The other thing is hexane. So hexane is a chemical that, like, end process, in the fall, you see the big semis going, if you live in rural area, going to take their corn or their wheat in. So then that process, when they process it into something that can then go to be made into processed food, they use hexane, which is also really bad. Glyphosate, I think more people are hearing the word glyphosate and kind of understanding that it's bad, but it was developed for GMO crops originally, but now it's used on many crops. And I've got this down, we'll talk about that, but just to desiccate it and kind of force ripen it, kill it right away so they can harvest it faster. Again, about money. But that glyphosate is now on all of these foods as well, and in our water system, and really affects gut health. We did another podcast on that. You could go back and listen. There's a whole podcast just on that. And then, you hear people all the time say, well, I have to take supplements because our soil is void of nutrients. With conventional farming, yes, it is. It's true. Not only are they using all of this, but they don't rotate their crops. They're not replenishing the soil. But true organic regenerative farmers are replenishing the soil, and they're doing all of the right things. So those plants are not void of nutrients.
Right, because you wouldn't be able to grow those plants without using the conventional products if your soil was dead, because it wouldn't support life. So the soil has to be nutrient filled to grow a plant without all of those conventional additives.
It's kind of like the fortifying your food. They're fortifying the soil.
Yes.
It's the same thing, really. Let's see, what else do I have? I don't even know. Oh, okay. Oh, and I was just going to say that these things, you've got to think about pets too, your pets. Right. For our family members, and their lifespans are decreasing as well and having the same chronic health issues,
Right.
and it's the same thing. And then, oh, and then I was gonna say too, that a lot of these, you know, especially the GMO crops and the wheat, it's not a GMO crop, but does have the glyphosate. They're going in to be made into not only processed food and pet food, but livestock feed. So if you
Right.
think about now, the livestock are eating this stuff, and then it's adding to their ill health, which we'll talk about. But then it's passed on to you, so you're getting it twofold. Maybe you're not eating processed food, but if you're eating conventional meat or conventional dairy,
Right.
you're eating it that way as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then I have conventional dairy and meat farming practices. So the meat and dairy, all of the conventional farming practices, most of them, okay, I shouldn't say all of them. There's plenty of great big ranchers out west that really are, you know, the cows are, you know, cattle's are out on the pasture and that kind of thing. But for the most part, when you get to the really yucky part of conventional farming, these animals are eating these GMO crops. They're in situations which are extremely stressful for them, especially pigs and poultry, like extra bad. And pigs are one of the smartest animals. You know, they're
Right. And I feel like it's the like opposite. So pigs are so smart that even like a mildly bad environment really stresses them because they realize it. And then poultry are so dumb that it's like the people in charge feel like it doesn't matter what kind of environment they're in because they don't comprehend well. So they're just put in really awful environments. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so if you think about, these are very stressed, sick animals. And I mean, think about you, if you're very sick and stressed, your hormones are off the chart, you know, your inflammation is off the chart, all of these things are happening. So it's the same for these animals. And then they're passing all of that on to you. So
Right.
the end product that you're getting is very sick. The other thing is with all of these chemicals, excuse me, in our environment, and you know, coming in from all directions that we're not even talking about, they bioaccumulate in fat.
Yeah.
And that's what I was talking about earlier. So with the animals, you know, there's too many poisons. Toxin is a poison, right? So too many coming in, your body can't keep up. And then your body starts storing it in fat cells in your organs and your brain tissue so that it doesn't kill you. So these animals are also overloaded with these toxins.
Right.
Now passing on to you. And then also with labeling or words for you know, conventional farming, you hear pasture raised, grass fed. First of all, grass fed, there's a video going around now that maybe people have seen. It's kind of good. It's got the dairy cows in their barn. They can never leave, you know, they're right there. And this big machine comes down and like throws grass at them. So it doesn't mean that they're out, you know, grazing and they're
Right.
pasture. And then,
You know, like raising animals, if you've had pets, it's a lot of work. It's expensive. If you want your pets to be healthy and happy, you have to invest time, energy, money into that. So we have, as a society, kind of just clamored for the cheapest, the cheapest, the cheapest. We're always talking about like eggs are $4. Oh my gosh, like people, you know, organic costs more. Well, that's because it costs money to raise something that is living, you know, and that's the problem. People want cheap, 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 cheap. So the people raising the animals kind of have to play into that. So as they reduce their overhead, that comes down to the state of the animals. So that's why organic seems like it's expensive because it just costs what it should cost, where really conventional is like subpar, cheap, low cost. Like it's so weird. People think about, you know, you wouldn't want to go to a doctor that was the cheapest. You're like, oh no, what's wrong with that? But with our foods, that's what everyone wants is the cheapest, the cheapest, the cheapest. And then they wonder why the food system is making them sick.
right, exactly. And then there's other labels like cage-free chicken, things like that. But if you really look into those, and that could be a whole separate podcast too, so we won't really go into that, but they only have to have a little window, and same for pigs, little window in the barn that they can see for however many hours a day, and then they can say that they're
Yeah, poultry is the worst. Like you really do want to go for a source that because there are so many little things with poultry that they're allowed to do. So they can keep these labels while there still is awful stuff going on. It's kind of poultry is legally allowed by is it the FDA? Yeah, the FDA is in charge of that. That they're one of the few types of animals that can be like just killed. Like they don't have to like the way they kill them is awful. So that's like rabbits are considered poultry, so you don't have to do anything. You can just very inhumanely kill them and they can be suffering for a super long time. So it's not even just how they're raised, it's even how they're killed, how they're processed. And there are regulations at the federal level that let across the board, no matter if they're organic or pasture raised, whatever, these things like how they're processed, how they're killed, not just how they're raised.
right. Also something I thought that I didn't have on my list, but it popped in my head while you were talking. There are animals that are cloned and have been cloned for a long time, and that's a real thing, and that's out there. So just so you know, they're not really using them supposedly in our food system in our country, but they are in other countries. And anytime you have something that's been messed with, it's going to filter out and cross.
Right.
It's just kind of keep that in mind. And then let's see. Okay, that covered that pretty much. Also, I did want to say with organic. So I should have said that when we were talking about conventional produce. Organic produce is a better choice, clearly.
Okay.
But that synthetic biology, bioengineered, that's not labeled, is allowed into organic produce. And it's fairly new, but it's allowed in because it can extend the shelf life. Like appeal was, really popular word there for a while. And I think we talked about that in a podcast, that's just a marketing term because that's for people that want produce that will last for a month, but they also use it behind the scenes, not labeled. Again, about money because there's not as much waste. They use it for fungicides with organic produce, organic grains, because they can't use the chemical one, but they can use this. And so conventional organic doesn't necessarily mean the greatest choice ever. Definitely a better choice, but still there are better choices.
Right. It has definitely become like that mid-range. Like whenever we're talking about things, like if you have no information, you want to stay ignorant and you just choose the cheapest, so that's the worst choice. And then you start to understand, or you just start looking at labels and you don't understand what they mean, but you're making a few choices, starting to understand. That's kind of like mid-range. And then once you really understand and you're making all the best choices, then you're here. So there is definitely like a gradation, not just in food choices, but kind of in every choice in everyday life. You're going to have that difference in things. And always, I can't even think of this where this would be wrong. Making, growing, doing something yourself is always the best.
Exactly. Always. And just remember that SynBio is not labeled. There is no way to look at your organic lemon and know whether that has been used or not. So just remember that. And then I have SynBio. That's the next one. I think it's exactly what I just said. Oh, and then the other thing with this synthetic biology, first of all, it's hard to keep up with the new ingredients they're making with this. There's things like vanilla, citric acid you see in all kinds of things. That's SynBio. Nutritional yeast. A lot of like vegans will use that, but it's actually that synthetic biology.
Yeah, it seems like it's expanding exponentially, but they're focused on things that are either expensive to grow and process. So something like vanilla, natural vanilla is pretty labor intensive and expensive, or something that is used so commonly that it may not be expensive, but it is overall a higher volume, so a higher cost. So that seems to be the two places where they're focusing. So like citric acid is in everything. So yeah, so they make that, so then it's bringing their cost down, and then things like in non-food areas too, expensive ingredients like in fragrances and perfumes and things like that.
Right, yes. And then the other sneaky ways it's in our food and it's really growing is GMO yeast is bioengineered yeast, which is synthetic biology yeast, and they use it almost primarily in everything that uses yeast. So all baked goods, pasta, anything like that they would use yeast, alcohol, wine. I mean, it's everywhere.
And that is one of those, like, it was a huge deal when they figured out how to synthesize that, because it's like yeast is such a living organism that it's hard to control. So it's hard to make something exactly the same every time when you're working with yeast, even if you're working with the same strain of yeast. So now they've figured out how to synthesize it at a certain point so they don't have to worry about like getting it there or where it's going. So they can just make it this form of the yeast and it'll be exactly the same all the time.
And it's like, you should go back and watch the podcast on that. It's crazy how this works, but it's essentially like a 3D printer. They're just printing out these proteins.
A lot of people are amazed by 3D printers too and how that works. So yeah, it is definitely a technology that is so new and growing so fast that it's hard to keep up with. Even if you understood it when it first came out, it's changed so much. So this is an area where you could spend so much time keeping up with it, or you can let us do that and just listen to what we have to say.
Right. And freaking out and researching, being afraid to eat anything. We don't want you there. That is like the most disempowering place ever. You want to be where you are empowered. And so, that's the goal of this. But the only way you can be empowered is to know the dirty reality, so that you can make good choices. So that's why we're going through all the scary stuff first. So the other thing, I was just going to say this, what you were just talking about, that lab grown meat that they put on the market, pulled off, put on, pulled off. I don't even know if it's on or off now, but it's
legally allowed, but there was like no demand. It's the situation at this point.
Yeah, but they're planning on bringing it back. But it's the same thing. It's 3D printed. It's disgusting if you look at the whole thing. The other thing so the GMO yeast, but there's also GMO rennet. So that's what they use in cheese. So almost all cheese has this GMO rennet in it. And remember, these aren't labeled. They're just in there. So if you see rennet or if you see yeast, 99.9% of the time it is the bioengineered GMO. Transglutamase, we see people react to this all the time. It's a part of the wheat protein, the gluten protein. But again, it's that synthetic biology. It's the 3D printed section of it. And it's transglutamase, glue, that's what it's for. So it's used in meat. Again, conventional farming, they glue different cuts of meat together.
Right. As the meat quality goes down, they have to make it still pretty and appetizing to sell it to you in its little styrofoam platter. So they've come up with, instead of improving the meat, they've come up with cheap ways to stick the meat back together to make it look better.
Right. So that can be in brats, hot dogs, sausage. It can even be in steak. It can be in a high quality steak that they've now taken the fibers of the meat and glued them together so you don't even know. But the thing is, with that transglutamase, even though it's synthetic biology, your body reads it as gluten, transglutamate, gluten. They both are a glue. And a protein sequence doesn't have to be 100%. It can be 80% the same, and your body goes, no, this is foreign invader. I need to get rid of it, and starts attacking it and attacking yourself. So people that are gluten intolerant of, anyway, transglutamase is something to be aware of. But again, it's not labeled.
No.
Excuse me. And then, oh, I just put that it's also in fungicides and then additives to organic food and also conventional food. So just know where that is. And, oh, and did I say alcohol? Yeah, because it's really alcohol across the board. The other thing, number 8, is insect protein in food. That's becoming more and more prevalent. It's been going on, but people didn't really know. But now they're trying to really push it as a sustainable protein source. And
Right, and that's the marketing around it is terrible because I understand we're looking for protein sources that are not so problematic, like don't create so much waste. Well, the real solution is that we need to eat a more balanced diet, less meat heavy, and do smaller locally sourced farms instead of big giant ones. Like that's the solution. But instead, they're looking for other sources of protein that are cheaper and less wasteful or toxin off, like the carbon that they're giving off. This is really what they focus on. And there are societies where that is a main source of protein and has been historically. But to get it to the point where it's cheaper and better to process, it's not like it's the same as a large animal. The way that they're growing them, raising them, and processing them is just disgusting.
yeah. So if you think about, like locusts, there are a lot of countries that eat locusts. And if you went out in the summer when the locusts are out, yes, they're probably a great source of protein.
Right.
The way that they are grown and processed. So for an example, they're the ADM plant in Decatur, Illinois here. What it does is process grains, the GMO grains, soy, corn, wheat, the big ones. And remember, wheat is not a GMO, by the way. They process them to go into pet food, livestock food, and processed food, right? It is the #1 polluter in Illinois. So think about that. Like there's a big giant Exxon plant up by Joliet. That's
It smells really bad. Like it is 20 miles from my house, and if the wind shifts, I can smell it.
Yeah, and think about what the pollutants are coming off of that. That is #3. This is #1. And that's your food, #1. That should make you think. But there's another, I think it's called Novatech or something or that's not right. That's close, but not right. But a company has gone into partnership with the ADM plant. So the ADM plant does this processing with the hexane, making this product so that it can then be made into processed food. Well, all of their waste product is then they need a place to do it, somewhere to put it again. So this other factory that is now partnered with them, they are growing black fly larvae. So what is that? That's maggots.
So they're taking this waste from this really, really awful food product to begin with. So you can imagine how the waste is, and then using it as food.
Right. For these maggots.
Yeah.
And they're growing hundreds of thousands, millions probably of these black fly larvae. Yeah, and they eat this toxic waste, and then they dry out the maggots again with hexane
larva.
Yeah, larva. And dry them out, and then they use that, they grind it into powder, and now that powder is put into our food system.
Right, because it's a natural protein.
Right. So you can see how the difference between going out and eating a grasshopper with, like people have chocolate covered grasshopper their yard, which still is, but right. Or an insect that is grown in this way. And I mean, just the whole process is disgusting, and that's going into our food. And so in our clinic, we do IgG food allergy testing, which is an autoimmune response to foods. And people I think the last few that we've had, every single person has been reacting to house crickets.
Right.
What that means is that it is really, they're eating a lot of it.
And this is one of those, this is not the way we test for these sensitivities. You almost always have to have had a pretty strong exposure or a long-term exposure to the protein in the food in order to have a reaction to it. This is not like you're born with a peanut allergy kind of situation. This is exposure. So if we're seeing so many people reacting and they're testing for,
Well, and that's the other thing.
yeah, like why are they testing for it if it's not common? It just, people wouldn't want to pay for that. So it's more common than you think. It's in the foods you're eating, especially people are now eating all of these like protein powder, protein drink, protein bar, and it can say like this is, a natural protein source. This isn't terrible made up in a lab protein source. Well,
And they have different words that they label it, like the house cricket powder. It starts with an A. I can't even think what it is right now, but so it looks like an ingredient. You wouldn't even probably question it.
Right.
They're not going to say house cricket. So if anybody's reading it,
or black fly larva.
right. And the other one that is on our IgG food allergy test right now are mealworms. So you know that they're in a lot of as well. But
like people aren't accidentally eating these as they're, feeding their pet gecko. I'm not accidentally ingesting the crickets at home. It's in your food.
Yeah. And again, it's in processed food. So what would be the simple solution? Just eat whole, real food.
Right. And if you look at something that has an ingredient list, don't eat things that have, an ingredient list that's like an essay. And don't eat anything on an ingredient list that you can't like, even if you can pronounce it, if you don't know what it is, don't eat it.
And that used to be a really good rule of thumb, like that you could really kind of navigate. Now you almost can't even use that rule of thumb because there's so much in there that is not even labeled. So again, just
right.
Processed food is your
things without a label are the best.
Right, exactly. And without a label, we mean like an apple, not
right, not like you went to the potluck and the thing in the crock pot doesn't have a label.
So the insects that they're using in food right now for protein powder is crickets, mealworms, black soldier fly larvae, grain mold beetles, and locusts / grasshoppers. So just so you know, but none of them are labeled that way on your food. And then number 9, seed oils, that's all over. Everybody's saying, oh, it's as if that's the only bad thing in the world.
I feel like oils, this is cyclical. Like every couple of years, a new oil is like the bad thing people focus on.
Yeah. And these are bad. They're high in omega-6s. It's corn, soy, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed, canola, which is rapeseed also, and then grapeseed and rice bran. But if you look at that, corn, soy, cottonseed, canola, rapeseed, those are all GMO crops. And sunflower, safflower, I don't know about not grapeseed. I don't know why that one's so bad, but then rice bran, those are all desiccated with glyphosate, even though they're not GMO crops. So that's just one reason they're bad.
Right.
But it's the whole processing again, like we just talked about with those black fly larvae, the processing that goes through to then get these subpar oils and make them high in omega-6s and make them very inflammatory is a yucky process. If you, like say olive oil, you can get an olive oil that is not very good for you, or you can get oil that's very healthy for you. So a big part of it is sourcing, the processing it went through.
Right. And again, this is one of those areas where you have to shift your mindset, and you can't think like, oh, the healthier, less processed one is so expensive. You have to look at it at that is what it should cost. That is the value is there. And these other ones are like subpar, super cheap. Like that's where you need to look at it, not the other way.
Yeah, definitely. And that's definitely just a mindset shift in a habit to work on. And then number 10 was omega-3s versus omega-6s. So you hear fish oil, don't eat
red. Hear like omegas.
Yeah. So, I think we all know that, fish are high in omega-3s, right? But if you have, that's,
No, I feel like people just know omega. I don't think they know the difference between the numbers.
no, I don't either. That's why but I never mentioned farm-raised fish. Farm-raised fish is really toxic, disgusting, very fatty fish. If you're getting a farm-raised salmon as opposed to a wild-caught salmon, the colors, there's a huge difference. The wild-caught is muscular, the farm-raised is very fatty
Right.
because they're not in the environment they should be. They're fed all of this yucky green stuff we've been talking about. That's not what fish should be eating. They even feed fish dead fish, which that is not what they should be eating.
Well, they feed chicken, dead chicken.
And even cows. And that's another thing, back to the animal, the way they're raising them. Cows they eat plant matter. That's it. And they're being fed these things that should not be eating. Like the mad cow disease, when that was
That's a,
they
haven't
were
heard that in a while.
but they were feeding them. They were trying to get rid of the waste of the dead
Right.
cows. They were feeding them. That probably made them insane. That'd be like being a cannibal for us,
But forced.
Exactly. So anyway, off topic with that. But the difference between omega-3s and omega-6s, it's again quality. So yes, wild caught fish, high in omega-3s. Omega-3s are antioxidants. They're really good for us.
And it's something we don't get in the standard American diet.
Right. And you hear a lot about like, don't eat red meat because it's not high in omega-3, but that's not really true. If you get a really good grass-fed beef,
Right.
it has a balance of omega-3 and omega-6 that's very good for us. If you get a cow raised in conventional farming, it's very high in omega-6, which is very inflammatory.
Right.
So again, it comes down to sourcing, if that makes sense. So you want to avoid the omega-6s because they are very inflammatory.
And they're like overly present in the standard American diet.
And that would be farm-raised fish. That would be conventional dairy, conventional meat. That would be these seed oils, very, very processed.
Right. And even a lot of conventional supplements, when you're looking at like the omega supplements, that's what they're high in.
Right. Yeah. And you definitely want to avoid that because it is very inflammatory. But just know that omega-3s don't just come from fish.
Right. And fish are hard because there's a lot of pollution in the water. So
Right.
then are you avoiding toxins or are you avoiding the gross processing? Fish are just, you really, really, really have to look into sourcing if you're eating a lot of fish.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing I didn't put on the list. It's fish. And because it's something that should be very healthy.
Right.
But the fishing industry, it's been overfished. And a lot of the problem with food is the way that just in the past 100 years, not even 100 years, people used to understand that you ate with the seasons. You ate what was available to you in your region, the seasons, that type of thing. And that's what's easy for us. But now everyone thinks that you can get strawberry 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And
you can.
Or salmon, salmon should be available very short.
Right. And then that's why, like, there's so many this is kind of off topic, but there's so many interesting studies on people who are now being labeled like neurodivergent and their food habits. And sometimes they have like they get obsessed and want to eat the same thing like over and over for like a month, and that's all they want to eat. And they're saying that could be like a throwback to this, how we're supposed to be eating seasonally. All of a sudden, salmon is available because it's that time of the year where they're spawning, and you see the bears, they just grab them out of the river. Right? So then you eat that and only that for like this short amount of time, and then you move on to something else. So that is really, you can eat like that. Like if this is when strawberries are available for this month, eat a whole bunch of them.
Right.
And then get back to more of a balanced situation. But that is how we should be eating. And people used to know, like, you would take a trip to a certain region to experience that food because it's available there. And now we're expecting to take a trip to the closest, large city to have that regional food from the whole world. You know, and I know that transportation is better and things can get moved from here to there faster, but that's not what's happening. We're just making things available through processing, through terrible growth, you know, everything we've just talked about. That's what's making these things available and low cost. You know, you used to say this food is, you know, super expensive and luxurious because it's hard to find. It's hard to go out and get it and then bring it to a consumer. So now they said, well, now it's still a luxury item. We still charge a bunch for it, but we farm it here and we can give it to everyone.
Yeah. So it's not just about the money, it's also about the consumer demand and the fact that people forgot that we can't get everything we want all the time.
Right. But we shouldn't.
Right, exactly. So then I had well, I just had pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, fertilizers down, but oh, we already talked about this because the point of this number was talking about it, how going into the groundwater and polluting our water, and also causes the algae blooms that we've seen, which kills the fish. So there, you know, it really affects the water that way. And we touched on that, but
Yeah, and that can actually get into your local water system too. So if there's big algae blooms happening, like your locale, and you've heard about that, like the fish side of it, that can also get into your water, and your water treatment might not be able to take all that out, and then people can get ill, and not know where it's coming from because of that bacteria in the water. So filter your water.
yeah, very important. Also, dogs that go swimming in lakes and things. There's last year there was a lot of that. Dogs getting really sick or dying because of these algae blooms, because they can be toxic, even though they are a living organism. They can still be
It's an overgrowth. It's not a balanced thing.
right, right. And it just shows an unhealthy environment, just like our bodies. People get sick because their internal body has become out of balance. You know, we give that fish tank analogy all the time, but we could also use the lake with the algae bloom analogy. Right. Same thing. It's an unhealthy environment that has gotten out of balance, and then throws everything off. So my next one is GMOs. Oh, I just made a list of the crops that are GMOs and then the non-GMO crops that are desiccated by glyphosate or Roundup.
Right.
A lot of times people think they're all GMOs, but they're not. So,
right. And like the impact to you in eating them is very similar, whether it's GMO or desiccated, but it is good to know the difference.
Yes. So between the two, you've got cotton, corn, soy, sunflower seeds. That's a big one that people are always surprised. Sunflower seeds are not GMO, but they are desiccated with glyphosate.
Do you think they're growing a big field of sunflowers and then laying them out in a single layer on their patio?
No.
That's not how they get processed.
It immediately kills them, then they can harvest. Alfalfa is a GMO, but think about alfalfa. Who gets that? The livestock get that. So not only are they eating GMO grass, they're also eating GMO alfalfa. Wheat is in everything. And this is part of why, oh my gosh, a squirrel just jumped from that tree over to that tree and like flipped in the air. It was distracted. You know, I was going to say that wheat is in everything. So, and people are reacting at this autoimmune level so much with wheat and grains. And it's because, you know, is it because of the glyphosate that's on it and they're reacting to the glyphosate, or is it something else? So that's something to keep in mind. Barley, sorghum, oats, rice, those are not GMO, but they're all sprayed with glyphosate. Millet, rye, oil seeds, again, mustard, linseed, sugar beets are GMO, turnips, bulb onions, flaxseed is something that people think is very healthy, but if you're not getting organic flax, it is also desiccated with Roundup or glyphosate. Buckwheat, canola, potatoes, there are GMO potatoes now. There are also GMO apples, pears, plums, cherries. So there's a lot of crops that are desiccated. and or GMO. And then, oh, I also just put that to remember, you know, we've been talking about processed food, but it's also totally void of nutrients, like we talked about. Very high sugar. Because again, sugar makes you crave it. Sugar want it.
Sugar and salt.
And salt, yes. And the salt that they use is a very low quality, not the salt that you want to be eating. Salt
No.
is really good for you.
Right. It's basically just sodium.
And then I put, it's really just loaded with shit. My words. But it is.
It is.
Seriously, you guys. But the other thing,
the cheapest possible substance, and then they add in chemicals that make it taste less. Salt and sugar make your taste buds light up.
right,
They add those so that you don't taste the terrible quality, and then visually they add in the color and they restructure and they reshape. So because your brain first will look at something, and if it's a, you know, a vibrant color, that signifies it has nutrients, a variety of vitamins. Eat the rainbow. So they're adding that in, you know, Skittles, but taste the rainbow. That tricks your brain into thinking that you're getting vitamins and nutrients because of those colors and those flavors.
right, because we are designed, you know, if you always come back to how we were designed from the beginning, we are designed to look for color. We can see color, you know, we see an apple, a red apple on a tree, we pick it, you know, that's what we look for. So they're playing into our brain chemistry, which is real, but then using these synthetic versions of it. Because we wouldn't want our food always to just be.
No, why do you think candy is bright colors? You're not going to eat, you know, beige Skittles.
Although there is a lot of food nowadays that is beige.
Yeah, with children especially, if they're not exposed to new things, I do tell a lot of people that, like, they're, oh, your plate's very beige, you're eating a lot of potatoes and breaded.
Yeah. So there's something to think about there. But the other thing is with this processed food, so much processed food, and this is across the board. This can be organic processed food. It doesn't have to be conventional processed food. It can be vegan, it can be gluten-free. But it's very high in simple carbohydrates, which
Right.
your body then turns into sugar, utilizes it as sugar. And everybody's, you know, if you have symptoms, you have infections going on in your body. It's just plain and simple. And the infections are an overgrowth of, you know, gram-negative bacteria. And that's what they like to eat, is sugar. So just because you're trying to avoid foods that are high in sugar, you've got to remember that if they're high in simple carbs, that is also sugar to the body.
Right. It doesn't have to say sugar to become a sugar once it's digested.
Right. So I think that's something that people forget. And then something else, the difference between simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates, because in a lot of these fad diets, carbohydrates are bad,
Right.
you know, but complex carbohydrates, that's if you're getting carbohydrates in, and we do need carbohydrates.
Right.
But in balance, and they need to be complex, and that way it still is a sugar for the body, but it's broken down very slowly and your body's able to metabolize it the way it should, whereas simple sugar or simple carbohydrates are just immediately turned to sugar, and it's like a big
right. That's why you get those spikes.
right. So keep that in mind too. I did write down Apeel. We kind of touched on that, and it's not just Apeel, there are other brand names, but the idea with that is to spray it on your produce. And it doesn't mean, I had a question the other day about what stores to avoid that, but it doesn't mean necessarily the store is spraying it on. It comes to the store. It's been sprayed on before it gets there.
Yeah, they want it in the big truck, in the big vat where it's waiting to get on the truck. They want it to stay fresh,
Right.
sealed.
Yeah. And, you know, if you think about too, with a lot of dairy or not dairy produce, it can come from thousands of miles away.
Right.
So it's picked before it's ripe. That's something else we didn't talk about. Picked before it's ripe, force ripened, then they spray this stuff on so that it doesn't go bad. Then it travels 1,500 miles to get to you. Then it's able to stay on the grocery store shelves for another month, you know, and then it can stay in your refrigerator for several weeks.
Imagine that you grew a pot of strawberries on your patio and then you picked a bowl of strawberries and you put them in the fridge. And then the next day you took them with you and you traveled 15,000 miles away. And then you put them in the fridge where you were at and didn't eat them for a week. What do you think they're going to look like when you open that up? That's what they should look like. You know, but you're okay with this process at the store because in your mind, you're buying them at the store and that's when that process starts because now I've taken it home. But really, you've had this whole long process before it got to you.
Right. And remember, that's that synthetic biology, that bioengineering, that they don't have to label. Appeal is just labeled because it appeals to people who want
Yes, it's in the name.
Yeah. So keep that in mind too. And just because it's been sprayed on there does not mean you can wash your produce and now get it off. It doesn't work. I mean, think about our skin. You put something on your skin, it's absorbed into our skin, right?
Right.
70% of what we put on our skin is absorbed into our bloodstream. It's the same with produce. Anything being on, it's being absorbed. So
right, and the thinner skinned fruits are what this is being used on because they're thinner skinned.
right. Yeah. Like strawberries.
Yeah.
And then I had, vegan food because there's so many people going vegan. So vegan food is some of the most unhealthy food because they're eating processed food, vegan cheese. You know, they're trying to eat what would have been a normal diet, but substituting. So like vegan mayonnaise, vegan cheese, you know, all of these.
If you're going to eat that way, you need to actually eat that way, not just eat the same way, but take out those certain ingredients because then you have to add something back in, just like we talked about with the chemicals. Like you can't have cheese without cheese and think that it's a healthy version.
Right. And also the meat, vegetarian meat, you know, there's all kinds, they pack a lot of just junk into the vegan food. So if you are going to be true vegan and making your own food and eating real, you know, real whole food, then a much better choice. Although you do have to be aware that there are some nutrients that we need, like vitamin B12, you know, vitamin D the part we're not getting from the sun. There's different vitamins that you can only get from animal products.
Yeah, humans are omnivores. We're not herbivores.
Right, exactly. And we do need a little bit, not very much, but we do need a little bit to get those nutrients. And then that's the other thing, vegan, that, you know, then you tend to supplement, get those nutrients, but then those are synthetic. Where did it come from? If it's not coming from an animal source, then, you know, you have to think about that. And we're not, I mean, I get why people want to be vegan.
Yeah.
I like to think of myself as I want to be an American Indian mentality where I just very thankful, try to be very thankful and not, you know, just take what is given to me, you know, give my body the nutrients it needs. And I just aware and thankful and mindful of that. But that's just, you know, that's just what works in my mind. But that's the hard one, eating animals. Okay, and so then the only other thing I had on this, and then we'll just talk about solutions, but is there's so many bad diets out there right now. And, you know, like this is popular and then this one's popular. And no, this is the one, you have to be eating this. So the carnivore thing is big right now. Practitioners I know are really pushing that. The vegetables are terrible to eat. You should only be eating meat. That can be very, very bad for you.
Or the like, oh, you're having issues with XYZ organ. You should only be eating organ meat to help with that issue. That's really popular right now too.
Yeah. And organ meat, remember what we talked about with the toxins and the bioaccumulation, it's stuffed in fat and it's stuffed in organs. So they're very high in toxins right now. Also, if you are just eating meat, meat is acidic. So if you look at the pH scale, we need to be, at a certain pH balance with our diet. And if you're only eating meat,
Right.
it's very acidic. It takes a long time to move through the system. So if that's all that you've got going in, it takes a long time. It's constantly in there. You're not really flushing everything out. And it does make people, I think part of why this is so big right now is it makes people feel better, because if they're having bloating, they're having GI issues, that kind of thing,
Right.
or only eating meat, it doesn't give anything for the bacteria to eat. So it might settle that down and make you feel better in the moment. And it can be a good tool for the very short term, but it is not a sustainable diet for you at all. And then like the paleo, we always give this example of this woman we saw at the Health Freedom Expo we were at, but she was paleo, that was her whole thing, but she was sitting there eating.
Oh, she was keto.
Or keto, that's what I mean. Paleo is another one, but yeah, keto, but she was eating all processed food and.
Right, because that's all just about that process, that ketosis. It's not about the food at all.
Right.
Paleo is a little bit more about the balance and the sourcing, maybe not sourcing, the availability, let's say that, of what was available in the Paleolithic era, which, is, I understand where it's coming from. It's a good start to an idea, but we're not living in the Paleolithic era. So even the things that were available to them that you're eating are not the same quality or source.
Yeah, and that's a big issue. Or another one is ancient grains. People always say, well, I don't eat conventional wheat, but I eat, ancient grains. Well, it doesn't really matter anymore because people are so overreacting. Their bodies are just on high alert all the time, having these crazy reactions. And like I said, the protein sequence can be similar, but not completely the same. And your body's going to react. So just because it's grown without glyphosate and it's an ancient grain doesn't mean you're not going to be reacting to it. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was the thing about the allergies. We kind of touched on it, but if you are having, the autoimmune response allergies, but if you're having symptoms of any kind, that means metabolically you've got problems going on. So
Right.
That's when people start, they're eating, it's presumably healthy, but they're still reacting like off the charts. They might be getting immediate reactions like rashes or eczema or, diarrhea, constipation, pain, bloating, and they cannot figure out what to eat, what not to eat, because they're trying to eat healthy. They've tried.
And it's so frustrating because they're like, I'm eating so clean.
Right. But it's if you're to that point, then that's when working with somebody is a really good idea, because then we can work on healing your metabolic balance.
It's not just about what you're putting in, it's about what you need to take out and then how you rebuild that system and heal. If you don't rebuild and heal, then you're just constantly going to be back in that state of dysfunction. So some improvement, back to being sick, some improvement, back to being sick, because you never really gave that foundation a chance to build.
Right. And a lot of times, people, I think now a lot of people are pulling out gluten. They're gluten-free, they're dairy-free. Okay, which is good. Dairy is very inflammatory. Dairy is actually a cross-reactive food to gluten. Protein looks similar, pulling out gluten. But the problem is what they're putting back in is gluten-free. That's another thing we can.
They don't want to not eat sandwiches.
Right. So everything that is gluten-free, it's kind of like the vegan thing. The gluten-free is full of gluten
and
because
so processed.
And so processed. So it might make you feel a little better in the moment, but it's still not healthy, especially
gluten-free is just pulling out wheat gluten, a very, very specific form of gluten that has been studied for these specific diseases and now has become that labeling and marketing. So there is a form of gluten in every single type of grain. It's just a slightly different type of gluten than wheat gluten and hasn't been studied to the same way. So it's not in this catch-all labeling of foods.
Right. We have a podcast on that too.
Yeah.
And of course, if you work with us, we have all of that information. So you don't have to worry about it and don't have to try to figure it out. But yeah, I did just want to say, if you are having symptoms, then there is more work to be done. The food is not going to turn around for you. And then just the other thing, just remember is, oh, I did have two other things I added at the end. Out. So people don't like busy lifestyles, that type of thing. You know, dining out is such a social thing for so many people, but you literally can't eat out without running into what we've been talking about. Even here in town, I talk about Epiphany Farms a lot. You know, they grow their food to bring to the restaurant, but they still have their other ingredients they're using. I looked at the ingredients.
There's still a kitchen that they have to
Right.
use commercially available products.
Right. So you can never, if you really want to be in control of what you're eating, I mean, everyone eats out now and again, but you really have to be aware.
Right. And when you're at the beginning of your journey, if you're having major symptoms, major dysfunction, this is something that you should set aside. Like if that's where you're at, you shouldn't be eating out, because one little thing could push you back to where you were before, and then you don't know what it was, and then it becomes anxiety, which adds to your overall dysfunction. So it is one of those things that until you've got that foundation and you are in that space where you feel healthy, your body can detox naturally, can deal with these outside invaders, you really should avoid it. And then if you're going to occasionally do it when you're healthy, just remember to pick the best option you can, stick to the things that are the least processed, the least additives. And then if you do that, you know how to like mitigate any kind of reactions you might have.
And the only other one that I had down was alcohol. So alcohol is definitely a contributor to leaky gut and ill health.
Just in and of itself, no matter what.
Right. Because it's technically it's a poison, but it's also sourcing, it always comes back to sourcing. So there are good sources of alcohol. I like to drink wine. I choose a wine that has non-GMO yeast and no sulfates, no preservatives, no additives. It's but you can find.
It's hard with alcohol because they're not legally required to put the ingredients on the bottle. So a lot of people just assume like this is wine, all it has is grapes. Like that is not true. That's not true at all. If you imagine, 30 years ago, the availability of wine was much smaller. Now you go to the grocery store and you can get 10 different bottles of wine that cost $8. Like it's being mass produced, and the reason it's being able to be mass produced at that low cost is because of the terrible processing and all the additives they can add to it now. So you're getting things like corn syrup, food coloring, eggshells, GMO yeast, like all these things, and they're not labeled. So you have to do the footwork of looking for a winery or company that doesn't have those things in it, and then stick with that. You're not going to find it on the label.
No, you really have to do research on that one. Also, there's better options like for grain alcohol and things. And if you look at like the blue zones of the world where people live generally over 100, they study those zones because people are so healthy. Not only do they live a long time, they're healthy up till they die. So they're studied. But if you look at them, most of those countries drink alcohol, but what they're drinking is the wine that they grew.
It's locally produced, it's very minimally processed, and it's moderately ingested.
Exactly. There's mead you can make from honey, things like that. So in the beginning, like for instance, people working with us, yes, in order to restore your health, you need to pull off of it. Then after that, it's moderation and sourcing. So it doesn't mean you can never have it again.
Right.
It's just, if you take nothing else away from this, sourcing across the board is
Yeah. Whole live foods, locally sourced. If you didn't grow it yourself, know the person that grew it, and then you're good to go.
right. And there are a lot of local farmers in our area. There's so many local farmers and they're so good. And if you work with us, we have a whole list, of course, that you get. Well, you don't have to research them because it takes some research.
It does. We
Because
also have a list, if you're not local, of how to find those farmers and the questions to ask them.
right, because just because they're local doesn't mean they're a good option for you. So you have to know what to ask and you have to be able to talk to them. Go to the farm if you can. But there's so many good options. And then growing your own, of course. And there's a lot you can do inside. There's kitchen scrap gardening. You can keep growing. I have green onions, you guys, from that I got in April of this year. They're still growing in my kitchen in water. And I even planted them out in my garden all summer and then brought them back in. They're just sitting in water and they constantly grow and I constantly cut them. They're finally getting, I wondered, this is my experiment to see how long I could keep them. And because, they were really tall and thick, they're now thin little sprouts. I mean, you can tell they're finally getting to the end of this life. But that's pretty substantial since April. That's amazing. This is December. There's a lot of things you can do. Growing sprouts and microgreens, they actually have more nutrients.
Right. No matter your space, there is a solution. There is a way to grow it. No matter the season, there is a way to access fresh produce. And it is okay to eat seasonally. Like you're going to eat more fresh produce in the warmer months and less in the cooler months. Just keep in mind, not just a balanced plate, but a balanced diet throughout the year.
Right.
Those kind of things.
And learning how to preserve food. So it doesn't have to be canning, I think a lot of people are afraid of that. I'm afraid of that. I had a terrible experience with that. But even freezing, like I just used the last of my Arconia berries. I'm so sad about that because I've been using them in my smoothies every morning. But I got a whole bunch of them when they were in season this summer and just froze them. Green beans are easy to freeze, broccoli. So you can buy a lot when they are in season from you grew or your local farmer. Keep them. Dehydrator's great for that type of thing. Fermenting. There's so many things that you can do that are easy so that during the winter, you then, have food and don't have to rely on just going to the grocery store and just getting out of that mindset of you have to only buy everything at the grocery store.
Right.
And then making your own food and trying to get away from processed food.
Right, like making your own meals, not just the ingredients of the food, but then the actual food you're eating.
Right, exactly. And it's so much easier than people think. And it's just a habit switch. And
it's a skill. It doesn't take that long to learn the skill of, chopping, cooking. It's something you can definitely learn very easily.
Yeah, and getting kids involved so that when they get older, they can do these things, but that's really it. I mean, there's a lot of just bad stuff across the board, but really, if you just do what we said, then you can take that overwhelm out and you don't have to be researching all the time. You don't have to be scared to eat, because there's definitely a way around this, but you've got to navigate it. Hopefully this helped.
And if you stayed all the way to the end, thank you.
Yes,
we did go very long. But there's a lot of different pieces to this that, if we separated into different episodes, it would make it more confusing. You got to kind of talk about the food system as a whole, what's bad, what's good, how to make those choices for yourself. So, if you need to go back and listen again, that's totally reasonable. And if you know someone who's really struggling with what to eat or how to get this kind of diet going in their lifestyle, share this episode. This got a lot of information, throughout the whole food system. So this is really important. It's one of those things that we can't condense into simple and easy bites. You have to know the whole thing.
Yeah, and one other thing I will mention is you have to remember, well, first of all, remember that don't wait for these changes to be made by somebody else. That's a big one. Start now. No, I forgot what I was gonna say. Really important. But anyway, yeah, hopefully this really helped you navigate because it is a tricky
Yes.
thing right now.
Yeah. So if you were here watching live, we had a couple people on. No one commented, but there was a couple little reactions here that I saw throughout. So thank you for participating. If you are not in our private Facebook group, you can head over there and join, and that way you can watch us live. Otherwise, thank you for watching our replay wherever you're getting this podcast. Always subscribe, like, share wherever you are if you want this kind of information to continue to improve your lifestyle. So we will see everyone in the new year.
Yes, yes. So our next one will be 2025. So
Yes.
so we'll make 2025 the best
Yes.
board for everybody. And of course, if you want the very fastest path to get there without the overwhelm, just reach out to us. You can work with us and we lay it all out in very simple terms, and work, support you through it. So
right.
Wonderful holiday, everyone. And we'll see you next year.
Bye. Bye.